So on the 30th of October, we had the competences for grammar. In the 2 sessions before, we've been looking at competences in general, and we have had a look at the interactive, the technology components included in the books. On the 13th of November, we're going to be looking at reading and unlocking doors to our students' future. That's going to be given by Seva Galvin, who's a teacher trainer from Piemonte. And then finally, on the 27th of November, we're going to be looking at dyslexia and special needs, and the idea of teaching inclusively with special needs students. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's session. So, what did you do last night? Of course, if we were doing a controlled practice and we were modeling an answer, which was, I went to the cinema, there is, of course, only one answer. But in reality, often, that's not the case. And if I were to ask, what did you do last night in a controlled practice situation? And instead of, I went to the cinema, my student said, I stayed at home last night as I wasn't feeling well. It would, of course, be absolutely perfect. And I couldn't but answer, you're absolutely right, good answer. So, it's very, very difficult, I think, for us to say there is always a precise answer. And that's the beauty of the language, but it's also the difficulty. So what does this actually mean for us as language teachers? Well, it does mean at times that we have a hard job marking or correcting our students' work, because if we've been looking at the present perfect or a particular aspect of language, asked for our students to give us a thesis or an essay on a particular subject, hoping that they will use the present perfect, but in fact they use other forms, other aspects, which are equally as correct, and they get their meaning, the communication which they are able to provide is perfect, then we cannot but mark it right as well. So let's move on to the next slide, just to get a bit of history, put a bit of a historical background into where we are. Up until the 1970s, essentially, language learning, it seems to me, was just like any other subject. It was content to be learned. In this case, it was grammar usage, rules, sets of vocabulary, pronunciation, and the learning of mathematics, biology, French, English, Japanese was essentially the same. It was learning by rote. Then from the sort of 70s to the mid-80s, linguists started to think about language in a different way, i.e. not as a body of content to be learned, but rather as a tool for communication. Krashen, I think, led the way really in encouraging the teaching of communication through communication, which rather left grammar outside the classroom, peering in through the window as fluency took control. It was more like the way that a child learns language, or in this case actually acquires language. And this actually was called the natural language method, or a natural approach. Then we moved on to the 1980s, and language learning really took another turn, and the linguist, particularly Merrill Swain, the Canadian, questioned the ability for learners to simply acquire language. So accuracy, and hence grammar, found its way back into the language classroom. Then we came to the late 90s, when Michael Lewis and Jimmy Hill, on the back of a lot of new discoveries and research that was happening at the time, about how language really is used, they started to promote the idea of the importance of lexical chunks, both in communication and in language teaching. And a methodology of exposure and experiment became increasingly frequent. So where are we now? What do we do? What do we as teachers do? Well, I think I think it'd be more appropriate, or most appropriate, to describe ourselves as eclectics. We use a whole variety of methods. We use grammar translation, we may use the communicative method, we may use the natural method, we may indeed use and teach using lexical chunks. So we've taken essentially what is the best of every method which has been taught in the last 50 or 40, 50 years. And that's important. That's important to remember, because of course there is a place for grammar. But what I think is particularly interesting, certainly as a teacher, but also as a publisher, is to see where we are with regards to things like the curricula and to books themselves. Because language books, I think, are often a great way of seeing where we are and what is being taught really on an everyday basis. If we do and have a quick look at what is now taken as for granted as being the standard for certainly language teaching in Europe, but certainly I think almost worldwide now. And these are the Common European Framework of Reference Guidelines. So we have A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. I've added a plus because I think more and more frequently now, publishers, but also teachers are finding the need to include a level between the actual set levels. So now it's very normal to have a B1 plus level because the passage from intermediate to upper intermediate is so great. The number of hours is just too much to fit into a single course. But also A1 plus is happening. You see it now. A2 plus is something which is more and more frequent. This has also had particular importance for the curricula, or the scholastic curricula around Europe. More and more governments are using the Common European Framework Guidelines as a basis for the curricula that they set for various school levels. Certainly, I mean, I've taken an example here from the latest reform, Italian reform, which basically stipulates that here, for example, at the end of the lower secondary schools, so the scuola media, they suggest the level A2 as being the exit level necessary or ideally achieved by our students. Likewise, for the biennial, we have B1, and for the triennial, B2. Now, this is very interesting, certainly from a grammatical point of view, because grammar is really not included in specific terms in the Quadro Comune Europeo di Riferimento. It is because in the can-do statements, to be able to achieve the can-do statements, you need to have a certain awareness and to be able to use appropriately the grammar terms and the grammar aspects. However, there's nothing which stipulates that for the scuola media, for the A2 level, they must know this, or this grammar aspect. However, if we were to look at the course books, and interestingly enough, I had a look at some course books from the 1980s, the 1990s, 2000s, and more recent, they have really changed very, very little. The grammar content is more or less the same. Perhaps we'll have a look at a few of the things which have changed in the next slides, but essentially we are teaching exactly the same grammar content as we always have done. So we've just really labelled it in a slightly different way now. And that is true also of grammar books. I'm going to show you now a page from the index of Macmillan's Grammar, Get Inside Grammar or Get Inside Language. There are two books, which, as you can see here on the left-hand side, we can see the A2 B1. This is actually a book for the superiore, for the upper secondary school system. And the first column essentially is aimed at helping those students in the biennial. The right-hand column, the B1 to B2, actually goes a little bit beyond that, it's B2 plus in some areas. It actually looks at what's needed for the triennial, so where they'd be going for the first exam, the Cambridge first exam. This is useful because it gives us a very, very clear guideline for what we need to be teaching our students. And I think this is going to be something which we can develop and work on. And as teachers, we know what we think is important and what we think is less important, just from our actual usage of English. Some things will be more frequent to me, whereas others will be more frequent to other colleagues or to other teachers. But as a guideline, it's very, very important now, I think, that we have this very well-established syllabus for A2, B1 and B1, B2. Right. However, this does lead us or bring us to another point, which to my mind is one of the sort of key points for today. And that is this. This was from an article called 8 Major Trends in the Global ELT Field, and it was on the TESOL blog. It says, nowadays, more and more research and discussions have focused on the issues of world Englishes and English as a lingua franca, ELF, rather than simply referring to any English spoken outside of the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia as EFL. This is, I think, interesting in as much as how many times are we asked by our students, how do you say this, or is this correct? And the older I get, the more uncertain I am about the answer. Not because I'm not sure about my own language ability or my own language knowledge, but because I actually don't really know what they do say in America or Canada, or what would be common usage in Hong Kong or China or Russia. And, you know, of course, we have to teach the English that we know. That's what I was taught as a trainee teacher. You teach what you know and what you would say. However, to say, or to be able to say, no, that's wrong, I think is something which is starting to become more of an issue. Certainly as a teacher, I don't want to be considered, or I don't want to give the wrong information. Now, let's look at this in a little bit more detail. The next slide, obviously, is a bit of a joke, but really, is it a joke? I have a quote here from a newspaper, which is the Pitt News from Pittsburgh University, which was, or wrote, noticing her healthy hair in a picture the other day, I Facebooked her a compliment. If a student of mine had written, I Facebooked her a compliment, I would undoubtedly have marked it wrong. But would I have been right marking her wrong? Because in actual fact, it's something which is starting to be used, the verb Facebook, to Facebook somebody. And I think that this is certainly the first point. Really, we have to be very, very careful when we're correcting or saying things are wrong without actually knowing whether or not things are said or spoken elsewhere. Obviously, we teach or work in Italy. Italy generally follows British English, and it's only right that we teach for the exams or for the purposes that our students will have, and for the exams, as I said before, or for the purposes that the students are learning English. That's normal, that's correct. However, more and more students, I think, are going across the ocean and going to America to study. More and more students are going to Australia. More and more people are going elsewhere in the world. And the use of maybe the verb Facebook in this case is becoming more and more frequent. So that's the first point I wanted to make. But also, there's another aspect, I think, regarding the past simple, and in this case, regular verbs. This is a page from our book, the Get Inside Language, which looks at regular verbs in the past simple. Now, I'm going to show you a slide which has a verb which is in both the regular and the irregular form. I'd like you to think in what you would mark correct or incorrect. Right, he learnt the words by rote, he learned the words by rote. He lit the candle, he lighted the candle. Some of you may be thinking, that the first, he learnt the words by rote and he lit the candle, are both correct. Others of you may be thinking he learned the words by rote and he lighted the candle are correct. The fact of the matter is, they're all correct. Certainly in the English which my grandmother used, she would have said he lighted the candle. It's certainly also true to say that there are changes constantly happening within the language. And I think if we went across the ocean to America, we would see that both of them are used. Although indeed he lighted and he learned the words by rote were used just as frequently as he learnt and he lit. So it really does depend where you're learning English. And interestingly enough, just from a sort of publisher's point of view, but as language teachers on the whole, American English is learned by more people than British English. You know, if we think about South America or Asia, essentially speaking, they are learning American English. So it's actually quite interesting as a teacher, if I were to receive something from one of my students which said he lighted the candle, would I mark it correct or incorrect? My grandmother would have said that. So what is wrong with that? Although instinctively, I would probably say he lit the candle. So as a teacher, I think my role is to tell the students really that they are both correct. If I have the knowledge that they are both correct, but in the UK, we would probably say he lit the candle. Right, let's move on to a little bit of technology, which didn't work too well at the beginning, but hopefully it's working okay now. This is the flipped classroom. I'm going to be talking about the flipped classroom. It's something that has become more and more frequent. It's a word which has been thrown around in the last few years. The flipped classroom is essentially a form of blended learning. We've been speaking about blended learning for a long time, but the flipped classroom is taking it, I think, a step further, in as much as it is something which students do at home, but which is becoming more and more common certainly in the UK, and I think also in Italy to a certain degree. I'm hearing about more and more teachers who do this. It's essentially when you would watch a video lecture or do things which enable you to prepare for a lesson which would normally have been taught in class, but is now being given to you as homework and then discussed and with the teacher in class, and you solve the questions that you would have done for homework in class. Let me give you an example of how that might happen.
Present simple. Il present simple è il tempo verbale che si usa per parlare di azioni abituali che si verificano nel presente o che si ripetono nel tempo con regolarità. In questo caso spesso si usa con avverbi di frequenza come always, usually, often, sometimes, never. Come in questo esempio. Mike usually travels by bus. Le desinenze del present simple corrispondono all'infinito senza il to e sono tutte uguali tranne la terza persona singolare, che si ottiene aggiungendo una S alla forma base. I drink, you drink, he, she, it drinks, we drink, you drink, they drink.
Right. So that was an example of how in this case, the present simple will be presented to students at home, because these resources are all available both on the Mondadori Education website or through the Me Book. Now, the Me Book is essentially the electronic version of the book which the students would buy, which is the paper version. This is a page from the Me Book, or it's half a page from a Me Book, which I basically took a photo of, and to show you that in the top right-hand corner, you will see three icons. One which says video, one which says flashcard, and one which says mapper. What we have just seen is the video. The video is, or the videos are present for most of the major aspects in the course book. The flashcards are essentially a way that can be used either in class or for the students at home to test their knowledge of what they've learned. And the concept maps are essentially what students can use to check that they have conceptually understood the lesson that they've been taught. Let me give you an example of what the concept map would look like. On the left, you can see we have what we're talking about, which is il presente, and then the students have to drop and drag, or drag and drop, the appropriate answer into the appropriate box. So in this case, il presente, we would take the present simple, put it in the top left-hand box, and then after that, they would have to choose between azioni abituali ricorrenti or azioni specifiche in un dato momento. So that is essentially the concept map. And there are a lot of concept maps throughout the course book. So what we've got to do now is move on fairly quickly, because I see I'm running out of time. But essentially, what I wanted to say was that I think the world is changing, just as language is changing, obviously. But does grammar change? Okay, we've seen that there are differences between, for example, American and British English, and we knew that. We're all, au fait with the differences, or a lot of the differences, both as far as single items of lexis and the grammar points. However, if we were to take this, for example, have got, it's interesting. It's becoming something which is not just the difference between British and American English. The Americans, don't actually use have got as a form very much or at all. In the UK, we do. However, what is becoming more and more frequent is for low-level course books not to include it at all, because we're going, or I think we're moving towards, well, especially when we're teaching, we're moving towards a lingua franca. We're moving towards a world English, which essentially takes the easiest or the most commonly used forms and just teaches them. It teaches those aspects which are going to be most useful to the students. Obviously, our books have it, because it's always been and has, will, I think, be taught for a very long time still. However, I think it's important to be aware that things are changing, and have got is a perfect example. Right, to move back very, very quickly to the flipped classroom idea, this is another tool which I think is of great use to the students. It certainly makes their learning a much more flexible, easier task, because they're much more mobile. In fact, all of these tools form part of what is called the M-learning environment, M being mobile. Here we can see I've got the page from the Imperativo. Again, this is an exact copy of the paperback version of the book. However, it's in electronic format. And on the right, you can see all of the instruments which are available to the students to be able to modify, change, use, write on the books for best purpose. In this case, I've highlighted the usage of the imperative, and I've highlighted also a couple of examples of how it translates into Italian, just to help me remember better. So that's another thing which can be done with the ebook. Right, I also wanted to give you this. This is an interesting one, which I've asked a lot of people, and the answers have been different. This is, what is the difference or the correct usage of should and would?
Is it better to use would or should when the subject is I or we? Let's investigate. Your favorite band is giving a concert next month and you're keen to see them play. Do you say, I would like to go to the concert, or I should like to go to the concert? According to traditional grammar, you use shall and should in first-person constructions, but will and would when the subject is in the second or third person. So we're supposed to say things like, I should not have known about it if you hadn't told me, and we shall see her tomorrow. But in the second and third person, it's you or she or they will see her tomorrow. But the evidence in our corpus shows that very few people still observe this rule. In fact, the expression I would like is over 50 times more frequent than I should like. Our conclusion is that both sentences are correct, but it's much more natural to say I would like to go, while I should like to go sounds rather old-fashioned. If you would like to know more about this topic or other real grammar questions, look at the Macmillan Dictionary blog.
Okay, that was just one of the many, many videos that are available on the Macmillan Dictionary blog. It's an interesting one because I actually do use shall, and often made fun of because I do use shall. But it's, it's part of the language which we speak, and I think it's only right that we teach what we would use. But as Michael said, it's 50 times more frequent. The use of would, I would like to, rather than I should like to. And I'm sure it's pretty similar with will and shall. So, moving on quickly, another part of the mobile learning environment, or the blended learning environment, is the online activities. Here we have an example of Macmillan Practice Online, which is a website which gives extra activities, extra exercises which follow exactly the course book which the students have in adoption. In this case, it's from Get Inside Grammar, and the topics, the units are exactly the same and follow what is in the course book. The nice thing about it, as I said, is that it's extra activities. It's not material taken from the book and put online. These are all new exercises, and there's a whole variety of exercise types. So it's not just grammar, but it's also listening activities. There are video activities. There's a whole series of different types of exercise. Another great thing, advantage that we've seen, which is actually can be scientifically proven, is that if I were to ask my students to do some work, some homework, in their workbooks or in their grammar books, they'd do it, undoubtedly. But I asked myself, how many times would they do it? Would they write it in pencil and then rub it out and do it again just to make sure they've got it right? I doubt that very much. They'll do it, finish it as soon as they possibly can, probably, and then close the book, and it's gone forever. What we've noticed with the online part of the exercises is that they don't do that. They do the exercise first because they don't get access to the answers. Once they've done that and they can see that they get the answers and are told which of the answers they've given is wrong, they go back and do it again, and often again and again. So much the case that they, generally the average I think is about 2.5 times for each exercise. Now, why is this important? Well, I think it's important for motivation. Students like to know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And the fact is that here they know what they're doing wrong, and that's really important. Secondly, the fact that they know what they're doing wrong is also giving them the incentive to go back and try and get it right. And often we find that students try again and again and again until they get things 100% right. Why is this important? It's important because they're given more access to language. And at the end of the day, that is what counts. It is about getting the right answers and teaching them the right things, but it's giving them the access to the language and seeing the correct model in context. Right, so that's the Macmillan Practice Online. Finally, I found this also on the 8 major trends in the global ELT field from the Seesaw blog. And it says that the changing roles and increasing responsibilities of teachers. With all these new trends, the role of today's teacher is also evolving. And our responsibilities have been increasing. In the 21st century classroom, teachers have multiple roles and responsibilities as facilitators of student learning and creators of a productive classroom environment in which students can develop the skills they will need for the 21st century workforce. It's interesting, that has certainly changed. We are doing more things, we are required to do more things for the school, we're required to do more things for the students, and I think this really does sum up very, very well a lot of the things which teachers are now asked to do. But I wanted to go back and link that into this whole idea of M-learning. M-learning helps us to reduce, if we will, a little bit of the work that we had to do in the past. If we go onto the Macmillan Practice Online worksheet site, we will see that students can get the answers already. So we don't have to do take students' homework home and correct it ourselves. The idea of the flipped classroom, where students look at videos and acquire the language that they need, or learn the grammar point that they need, and then come into class and just make sure that they've fully understood it with the help of their teacher, rather than the opposite happening. I love grammar, I teach grammar a lot, and I just wanted to leave you with a couple of last things which I think sum up beautifully the importance of grammar. Hopefully the slide will come through. He did indeed find a position, but it wasn't what he was looking for. Okay, a bit cruel, a bit harsh, but I think it just goes to show that we do need to teach accuracy as well as fluency. It's fundamental. And the final slide is from a video by a dub poet. Now, dub poetry, I'll go back because I would like you to read it first. Dub poetry is something which is a movement which is growing increasingly popular in the UK. It's also dub music, I'm sure you'll have heard about. There are dub poets like Zephaniah who really paved the way for dub poetry as a whole. Zephaniah is a fantastic artist, and I encourage you to go and have a look at him on YouTube. This particular poem was written by a Dub poet called Disraeli. It's about the English language. It's called The 21st Century Flux. And again, this was actually written for the Macmillan Dictionary. And you can find all of the extra worksheets and all of the material which goes along with the video on the Macmillan Dictionary website in the blog section. And this is the last part of the poem. So English, it lives as it's spoken, and it mirrors the truth, and there isn't any owner but you. Welcome to the 21st century flux. For now, English is the language of choice. But when it dies, as every tongue eventually must, let it be said, you added your voice. It's a beautiful poem, and I really do recommend that you go and have a look if you can. Right, we have a question from Bettina from Monza, and she asks if the videos are available. Yeah, the videos that I showed you, the video from the Present Simple, is available on both the Mondadori website, which is at mondadorieducation.it/English, or they're available in the me book of the grammar produced by Macmillan, which is called Get Inside Grammar and Get Inside Language. Right, let's see if there's any other questions. We have a question here from Sabrina from Piacenza, who says, can I teach speaking and encourage communication without focusing on the grammar rules? Yeah, absolutely, of course. I mean, you know, but I think often the most successful lessons are those where you look at a particular grammar rule, but do it through fluency activities or communication activities. Most books now include in the teacher's resource materials, certainly ours do, in the teacher's resource materials, communication activities which look at promoting and developing students' ability in a particular grammar area. Okay, perhaps just one more question. Here we have something on language. So where can I find the new language that my students are using, for example, to Facebook? That's a very interesting question. They're often difficult to find. It's not something which is easy to find. Again, on the Macmillan website, the Macmillan Dictionary website, where we have a section which is called buzzwords. And the buzzwords are words which are becoming frequently used in the language. And essentially for them to be included in the dictionary buzzword section, they have to have been published somewhere in some journal or some newspaper somewhere in the world. And that entitles them to be used in the buzzword section. Okay, thank you very much indeed.